The vast majority of people who click on this video have absolutely no interest in the history of the controversy between myself and internet loser Soycrates, internet nobody Soycrates. However, some of you might be interested in having a glance back at what my content on social media used to look like before I even had a YouTube channel. You're also going to hear some optimistic reflections from me about the extent to which I think the internet is actually becoming a better and better place. I think that people are learning to cope with the climate of perpetual defamation in all directions at all times, which goes on the internet. Before I ever had a YouTube channel, this is an example of a post I made in completely good faith and with good intentions on my blog that was then denounced as harassment by Soycrates. This was denounced as harassment of women by Soycrates. This reflects a very interesting time in my life when I was in France with my first wife and our tiny baby daughter. And I'm complaining, as any vegan might, that in France you're surrounded by baby food made out of mushed up veal. So this isn't just cow meat, it's baby cow meat. You're supposed to start at only 6 months old feeding veal to your baby, and this is so-called normal here. So I complain, the French feed veal to their infants starting just a few months after birth. Apart from the vampiric imagery involved of baby eating baby, so to speak, you really have to wonder at the assumption that it would be normal for a baby who had barely developed its first teeth to rend the flesh of a cow. But this is France. Assimilate or leave. I'm leaving. So this was in the period when I was still living in France with my first wife, but we had already made up our minds that we were going to give up and leave France. A very difficult airplane journey with my tiny baby daughter all bundled up in her arms. Here, what you see on screen is I got an angry comment in reply to that from a meat eater, someone who was anti-vegan, and I respond to that comment in a humorous way. In purple text there, you see what the anti-vegan person says. What? This is in France. Do you really care that much about the dietary morals of a French baby? Yes, I do, actually. I'm vegan, and I sincerely care about the dietary morals of French babies, including my own French baby, who's still growing up in France, going to French school, by the way. And we don't know. We don't know to what extent my ex-wife is now raising her as a meat eater rather than a vegan. But my ex-wife long ago gave up veganism, both as a diet and as an ethical system. Stop trying to disgust people and give them a false image of impurity because of a cultural difference. So again, I made a vaguely humorous, mocking post in reply to this saying, she may look harmless, but she would feed veal to a baby. And it's not because she's a French nationalist, apparently. This is the stunning response to my earlier post that barely made any comment on the practice of turning veal into baby food, feeding it to infants at the start of their 5th month of life, according to official guidelines, because I think the label on the baby food packaging pretty much condemns itself. So yeah, this is this very kind of mild, mocking form of humor I engaged in on my blog, and then Soycrates tried to harness this as evidence that I'm harassing and stalking women on the internet. So look, you know, Soycrates herself, whether it's under the name Soycrates or under the name Chantelle Robin or under the name Ariel Garlow, under all these different names, she very harshly insults and condemns people all over the internet. She very harshly denounces and defames me. She doesn't perceive anything she does herself as harassment, but she provides links to precisely these posts on my blog as proof of me harassing others. So again, very, very funny to look back at this now. Today, in the year 2020, I just don't think people in the audience are so easily manipulated. I think people know to kind of click on the link and check what the person actually said. I don't think anyone would even be manipulated today in the same way that they were manipulated by Joe Best on all sides of the Joe Best controversy. I can think of a lot of examples of really insane controversies within veganism that I don't think could happen again today. All right, my reckless optimism aside, So here's someone just making an anti-vegan statement on Tumblr. Okay, so if you are vegetarian or vegan because you think it's wrong to eat something that was once living, think about this. If it's wrong for us, the top of the food chain, to eat animals, tell all the other animals who eat other animals that they are doing it wrong because they're being immoral. In fact, if it's wrong to eat living things, then stop eating plants. It's the circle of life. Start eating processed, non-living garbage, and maybe you can escape hypocrisy. She tells us with a curse word to shut up, and there's more hatred in the tags at the bottom, as you see. So again, this is the same kind of running gag, as I said before, the same joke, where I just say, know your enemy. She may look harmless, but she's more dangerous than Monsanto. There are millions just like her, swarming all around us all the time, with that same malevolent stare. Oh yeah, you have to admit, that's a somewhat malevolent look in her eyes. Anyone who actually practices the virtue that they preach is not a hypocrite, regardless of how debatable those virtues may be. If someone tells me that he thinks every young man should join the army at age 18, he is not a hypocrite for saying so, presuming that he joined the army himself at age 18. I've met a few guys like that. Anyone can practice veganism, whereas not everyone can join the army. Someone who says that people should, and who also does so themselves, is therefore immune to any possible charge of hypocrisy. By contrast, preaching the religious concept of the food chain and not actually practicing what you preach, that would make you a hypocrite. Jalen Vog. This is obviously the name of her website, not the name of her as a person. And again, this very mild, humorous response to an anti-vegan on the internet. There, it says at the bottom-most example, harassment of user Jalen Vog, whatever her name is. This is stated to the audience with no humor as an example of me harassing a woman on the internet. That this is harassment. This is one of the main posts from my own vlog that she provides a link to as an example of me supposedly harassing her or justifying her hatred or rage towards me. And all that I say here is, there was a time when Soycrates was keeping it somewhat realer on Tumblr. This reflection was buried roughly 1,000 pages back in her blog's history. I only saw it because I wondered how many pages there were in total, and wow, you really notice a different attitude when she was first starting off in this medium. In terms of what I'm alluding to here, if you go back to the picture, you can see just below the image, she's reflecting on how eating a scone makes her feel proper, and then she goes on to talk about poverty and student loans, but her own desire to live a more glamorous or luxurious lifestyle. It's just a more down-to-earth set of reflections, as opposed to the insane ego trip she got on with the tiny amount of fame the internet had offered her. And I remark, philosophically enough, Tumblr is a hall of mirrors. People stick their faces into it and see themselves distorted 1,000 times over, staring back. Why? I think people go in with all kinds of motives and tend, soon enough, to forget what those motivations were. So she could have responded to this in any way whatsoever. I can't even really say this is me criticizing her. It's just a sort of reflection on her internet career, such as it was. But no, with absolutely no irony, she provides the link to this as an example of harassment and of me being a misogynist and so on. And again, she's made this allegation with these same links. I mean, she copied and pasted the same list of links. She's done this on Reddit for years. She tried her hardest to get me kicked out of Reddit groups and Facebook groups. She went around trying to build up this legend that I was, worse than Cobra Commander, that I was worse than Megatron, that I was worse than Skeletor, because of this so-called harassment on the internet. Deep into this somewhat ridiculous controversy, I made this illustration after Soycrates had already been defaming and denouncing me for some time, after she had been demanding that my blog be deleted for some time. She had a whole campaign of asking people to join in and write to the administrators at the website and deplatform me, we'd now say, deplatform me, delete my blog. And after she carried on this campaign, I made this somewhat ironical image in response to her that shows her in between communist philosopher Slavoj Žižek and Socrates. At that time, she was very, very far to the left. She had a lot of communist stuff like Slavoj Žižek. I don't know if politically she's still that far left-wing anymore. And of course, she is wearing a Dungeons and Dragons t-shirt, to which I ask, fashion or fashion statement? And the joking, humorous contrast I make is to myself wearing a series of t-shirts with political statements. These are political statements I would be willing to make on a t-shirt, whereas I would not be willing to wear a Dungeons and Dragons t-shirt. Here's the good news, guys. Stupidity and skepticism are two totally different things. I don't think that human beings on planet Earth are suddenly getting dramatically more intelligent. I don't think they're suddenly getting less stupid, but they have definitely become more familiar with the process and the product of defamation on the internet. Human nature doesn't change, but technology does. People have learned that while the internet may resemble a newspaper, it's not written by journalists, it doesn't face editorial scrutiny, that when you see factual claims made on the internet, you have to think skeptically, you have to think procedurally, you have to question the motives of the author, you have to question how you'd be able to verify any of the claims made by that author. And sometimes all that verification requires is clicking on a link that tells you something is harassment, that tells you something is misogyny, and questioning for yourself, is this in fact harassment coming from a misogynist, or is this just a mildly humorous statement from a vegan in response to someone who basically sent him hate mail when he complained that, you know what, it's pretty weird here in France that people mash up baby cows and then feed them to their own human babies as veal. Dun, 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 dun.